A quick reminder to our viewers, we'll be watching tonight's presidential address and listening to what the president says tonight. But we're not going to take it live, as we've been discussing. That's because this president, sadly, has a history of misleading and in some cases simply false statements on what we've been talking about tonight, election security and integrity. Also, the White House earlier today said he would be showing newly classified documents. So we want to make sure that we have time to review those documents, talk to experts about them, contextualize whatever he says or shows before airing it. But if there is news, we will bring it to you ASAP.
What's up, family? I want you to really think about this for a second. President Trump just delivered a primetime address from the White House, a bombshell speech that basically revealed our elections are severely compromised in multiple ways. And I'm talking about evidence, I'm talking about documents, I'm talking about classified information that was declassified and put out for the American people to see. And here's the part that should make you sit up straight in your chair. CNN, NBC, ABC, the mainstream media, they decided they were not going to let it air live. Let that sink in. The president of the United States is speaking to the nation, and the networks that are supposed to inform you made a decision they weren't going to let you hear it. They told you, and I quote, "We are not going to take it live because we need to fact check it. We need to review the documents and we need to contextualize it." Translation, we're going to tell you what he said and give you our opinion on what he said instead of letting you hear it for yourself and make up your own mind. This is why I do what I do, because the simple fact is I like to factually bring the receipts as we speak in truth, but not tell you how to think or what to think, but having a thoughtful conversation where we are basically coming up with different perspectives. Because see, the thing is, I'm always open to hearing a difference of perspective no matter how much we differ, because the things you may say I may not know of, and the things I may say you may not know of. So you don't know what you don't know, which is the beautiful part of conversation, even if though we may agree or disagree or just differ entirely and totally just disapprove of what each other is saying. But the simple fact is you got another perspective, let alone insight and understanding on a different perspective to know based on a multitude of options from the conversation and ideas from all these perspectives on which way we should go as a country, which I feel as though is beautiful, because then it helps us continue to be innovative and continue to go in the right direction, but also understanding what is right and what is wrong. And from a common sense perspective, the righteous way to continue to impact positively the next generation, our children, and this country continue to grow as beautifully as it is, the United States of America. So I say all that to say, with the media basically saying, we're going to tell you what he said and give you our opinion on what he said, and instead of letting you hear for yourself and make up your own mind, because this is a classic tactic. They did not want you to hear President Trump explain to the world with proof and evidence what has been happening to our election system. And that alone should tell you everything you need to know about who controls the narrative in this country. Now, let's break down what he actually said, because this is where it gets real. The president revealed that over a period of years, starting during the 2020 election cycle, the People's Republic of China carried out what is believed to be the largest compromise of election data in history. And we're talking about 220 million US voter files. Think about that number for a second. 220 million. That's not a typo. That's not a rounding error. That's 220 million names, addresses, phone numbers, political party preferences, and other sensitive data. Maybe Social Security. Maybe. But I'm going to say other sensitive data that China obtained. Another country, our competitor. And according to the documents, the intelligence even shows that China set up a data exploitation unit specifically for this project. This is not some random hacking. This is a coordinated, systematic, state-sponsored operation to get our election data. And then here's the part that really gets me. The documents also reveal that members of the intelligence community, the deep state, actively worked to suppress and downplay this information and covered it up from both the president and the American people. So not only did China get 220 million voter files, the people who were supposed to protect us decided to hide it. They decided to bury it, and the only reason it's coming out now is because President Trump has people in place in his second term who actually care about getting the truth out, and people who aren't hiding things. That's the difference, family.
Reveal just how vulnerable our elections continue to be. We are releasing the results of a stunning investigation by the Department of Homeland Security. According to the DHS review, state voter rolls and public records, They identified approximately 278,000 non-citizens who are registered to vote in federal elections. Since Democrat states refuse to share their voter files, the real number is actually much higher than that. Yet, even this limited analysis found more than 250,000 foreigners illegally registered to vote. Put together, these disclosures reveal an election system so broken and so vulnerable that no one can possibly defend it. It is not defensible. Hundreds of millions of U.S. voter files are in the hands of foreign governments. Our machines and ballot counting systems are exposed to hacking and manipulation and corruption. China and other countries have been trying to meddle in our elections. Evidence of fraud has been buried. Hundreds of thousands of non-citizens and dead people are listed and active on the voter rolls, and yet we still have elections with no voter ID, no proof of citizenship, and tens of millions of ballots floating aimlessly through the mail.
So there you have it. And then he dropped another bombshell, right? The Department of Homeland Security did a review of state voter rolls and public records, and what did they find? Approximately 278,000 non-citizens registered to vote in federal elections. Now, let me say that again. 278,000 people who are not American citizens are registered to vote. But here's the kicker. Democrat states, as he was just saying, refuse to share their voter files. So the real number is actually much higher than that, and they're hiding the data. And you have to ask yourself, why? Why would a state refuse to share voter roll information if they have nothing to hide? If I'm a business and I'm being audited and I refuse to show my books, what does that tell you? It tells you there's something in those books that I don't want you to see. Same thing here. They don't want you to see how many non-citizens are on their rolls. They don't want you to see how many dead people are still registered. And yet we still have elections with no voter ID, no proof of citizenship, and tens of millions of ballots floating through the mail. California's recent election for mayor of LA and governor was held on June 2nd, 2026 of this year. And it was just completed on July 10th of 2026 of this year. Over a month that took a month to count votes. And he said it himself. This is worse than any third world country because there's no third world country that has elections like we have in the United States. And you know what? He's right, because in most third world countries, at least they know who won the next day. Now, here's where the hypocrisy really starts to show. And I want you to listen closely because this is important. The same people who were obsessed with Russia back in 2016, who told us that Trump was illegitimately elected because Russia meddled, who ran story after story about collusion and conspiracy, those same people are now telling us that China doing the same thing, right? Those same people are now telling us that China doing the same thing, actually way worse, doesn't matter. That's what they're telling us. When it was Russia, it was the biggest scandal in American history. They spent years investigating. They spent millions of dollars. They impeached the president over it, and they told us the election was stolen. Now it's China, and suddenly they're saying, well, China was just gathering information. They weren't trying to change the outcome. It's not the same thing. And you see the media anchors doing mental gymnastics, twisting themselves into knots to explain why this is different. One of them literally said on air that China was relatively neutral and that they were leaning against Trump and that it didn't affect the outcome. But when Russia was doing the same thing, Russia was affecting the outcome. Trump was illegitimately elected. Do you see the contradiction, family? You can't have it both ways. Either foreign interference in our elections is a crisis that needs to be addressed, or it's not. But you can't say it's a crisis when it helps your political narrative and then dismiss it when the evidence shows the other side doing it.
The president has just concluded his speech tonight that is focused on U.S. elections and what they say is attempts at foreign interference in U.S. elections, as the president also brought up conspiracy theories about the recent California primary, theories that are unfounded. And I should note that unlike the claims he made about the 2020 elections, he has also offered the claims he's made about the 2020 elections, he offered no documents to back up what he said about what happened in California.
Evidence of fraud has been buried. Hundreds of thousands of non-citizens and dead people are listed and active on the voter rolls, and yet we still have elections with no voter ID, no proof of citizenship, and tens of millions of ballots floating aimlessly through the mail. As one example of the insanity, California's recent election for mayor of LA and governor was held on June 2nd, a long time ago, but it was just completed a few days ago on July 10th. Think of that, much more than 1 month. Took a month to count the votes. I wonder what they were doing. This is worse than any third world country. There's no third world country that has elections like we have.
That's because officials would say that U.S. elections are a lot stronger than third world country elections. And it's important to note, as you were listening to the president and his arguments tonight, that really all of this is in the context of the president trying to push the Save America Act, as he calls it, the SAVE Act, as it's known, on Capitol Hill. Right now, it cannot pass on Capitol Hill because it doesn't have enough Republican votes in the Senate. And John Thune, who is the leader of Senate Republicans, has made clear they are not willing to get rid of the filibuster and don't have the votes to do so in order to lower the threshold of how many votes it needs to get passed. The president's entire argument tonight, as he was building up with these newly declassified documents from his officials, was about the SAVE Act in and of itself. Yet still, it's not clear and unlikely that that's going to change the minds of Senate Republicans. My colleague John King has been watching this speech. And John, obviously, this is something the president has been pushing for with increasing fervor as we get closer to the midterms. What was your takeaway from tonight?
A lot of ominous tone from the president, ominous words from the president. It sounded more like a spy novel. A familiar complaint to you, Caitlin, about the deep state. The most striking thing the president did was he focused mostly on China, and he said he was releasing all of these new documents tonight that were going to prove more things about China. He says trying to get voter roll information, trying to learn about how to pry into voting machines and voting systems. He never directly connected any of that to changing an election result. That's important. I don't have the documents in front of me. We'll see if they get you there, but the president never did. The only time the president said anything about nefarious action actually changing an election was he said there are documents here showing how China helped the Maduro regime in Venezuela in 2020 change votes to stay in power. That is the only specific claim of actually rigging or changing an election result the president made. Much of it was, again, China's trying to do this. Russia did a little bit of that. But again, focused mostly on China about things we've known about, things that have been in past intelligence reports about China. Yes, trying to get information about U.S. voters. Yes, trying to test the vulnerabilities of U.S. election systems. But nowhere did the president in that speech connected to they changed the result in this state or they changed the result in this precinct. There was no connecting the dots to that point in the speech. I don't have the documents in front of me. Our team is looking at that way. But the tone of it was overwhelming. What was most striking to me, Caitlin, you covered the Trump White House at the time, was he had a boogeyman, and it was the familiar deep state. The president saying that this was all kept from him, kept from John Ratcliffe, his then director of national intelligence, kept from Gina Haspel, his then CIA director. Marco Rubio, who's now the Secretary of State, was the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee at the time. He has access to just about everything in U.S. intelligence. But Trump was making the point that people working for him, maybe they came from they were there in prior administrations, were keeping this information away from him about what he alleges is a deeper, more nefarious Chinese plot than we have ever known about. Look, the proof will be in the documents. But again, the president never connected the dots in any way to saying, and they did this in Georgia, for example, or they did this in Arizona, for example. He talked about a Democratic voter registration group in Michigan that he said, as if, this was a horrible, horrible thing. They were giving out gift cards to people if they registered more voters, as if there was some nefarious nature to that. So a lot of it was greatest hits. There were some new allegations about China having maybe a more aggressive role than we've known about in the past. But again, nothing from the president where you can say, Party X did this, changed an election here in a way that changed the outcome. I did not hear one word of that. I heard a lot of ominous. And again, he says he wants the Congress to pass the SAVE Act. I've spoken to a number of experts today who think foreign meddling is a problem. The United States should do more about it. They don't see much in the SAVE Act that does anything about that. They think it's all about Trump's.
About raw intelligence, they can be tips, they can be just calls that come into the FBI. A lot of those are just thrown out, thousands of them, even on a daily basis. Explain to people watching who just heard him kind of portray a universe where the intelligence community is hiding information from him, how this actually works, why raw intelligence wouldn't be even presented to a candidate or put out publicly.
Yeah, so the intelligence community collects easily hundreds of thousands of data points any given day. They collect it from human spies. They collect it from signals intelligence. They collect it from electronic signatures and environmental variables in any given geographic area. And a lot of what they get turns out not to be true. So if I call the CIA or I call the FBI with a tip, there is a record, a documentation of what I said. But that doesn't mean it's been verified. That doesn't mean it's been analyzed. And most importantly, that doesn't mean that it's true. So what we could be seeing happening here is essentially they take all the conspiracy theories that made their way to the intelligence community, were looked at, vetted, found wanting, and therefore jettisoned, and they're declassifying those, but potentially not declassifying the information that disproves it. And we're really at a point where, because of the nature of the individuals heading these agencies, we can't take their words at face value anymore. And to the extent that he's alleging a deep state cover-up, it's really important to note every single thing he is describing happened during his first administration. So if the intelligence community was against him, which I don't believe, having worked in it at the time, and if people were obfuscating what was actually going on or selectively editing the president's daily brief, those were the people he picked and put into power. So unless he's going to start blaming his own appointees instead of the career professionals who did their job like apolitical patriots every day of their careers, there's no reason we should take anything he's saying right now seriously.
Well, I think, family, Trump has definitely learned from his first administration. I mean, he even had Mike Pence turn on him, his first term, the former vice president that was the vice president alongside Trump on his first term. But I want you to put something together, family. We just having a conversation, and tell me what you think down in the comments about this. Xi Jinping is still supposed to come to the United States, or somewhere within the time frame of coming to visit the United States. President Trump and Xi Jinping gets along. They're close. They're very good friends. They get along, right? So why do you think, with Iran going on right now, China needs oil? If we are basically running a straight and it's at a chokehold, and it forces a negotiation, which is, I feel as though this is the art of the deal maker, of which President Trump is basically displaying his gifts and talents right here. So if we control the oil on which we give you, and you get it from Iran, in this case China, but they're at a chokehold and they're desperate for oil, Donald Trump can say, hey, but we got reserves over there in Venezuela because we got Maduro, and Venezuela is the milk and honey when it comes to oil, flowing with the most oil in the world. I give you oil, you give me this information about the elections. Cool, cool. I give you this, you give me that. Art of the deal. Let me know what you think, family. But also, like I said, President Trump can't control the individuals he appointed. You would hope as a president they'd be on your team, but he was an outsider his first time, right? Everybody thought and cackled and laughed and thought it was a joke and didn't believe that President Trump can even be the president, coming from his background of just being a real estate investor, a real estate businessman who basically became successful through real estate. Not a typical politician, you would say, right?
He also said something, and this struck you, I knew, Ken, when we were watching here together, about access to voter files. Now, I worked in politics long enough to know you can buy voter files. That's what state parties do, and it works differently in every state. But talk to me about your reaction to that, because he made it seem, again, like it was a big conspiracy, and we're here to kind of break down all of the BS around that.
100%. And that goes to what he's trying to do here. He's creating this perception that there's this deep state conspiracy, so that even if some of the things he said were true, they don't mean what he's saying they mean. And for example, this issue, he's told us that the Chinese have obtained 220 million U.S. voter files.
This is the funny part with MS now. They are basically attacking what he said, but the funny part is they know he knows something, but they don't know what he knows. Because like I said, he could have told Xi Jinping, I need all the people, I need all the information. You want your oil, you want your factories and things flowing, in which China derives off of oil, in which we overtook from Iran, which you were basically banking on Iran to continue to supply with oil as a lifeline, and they were the lifeline and what provided oil to China. If we take that, then that means you have to give us what we want in exchange for you to be flowing in your economy with oil because you can't run without it. We have oil here in the United States.
In 18 states, either bought, stolen, or hacked. But as you just said, a lot of these voter rolls are available for download. They're not secret records. Just because you obtain a voter record doesn't mean that you've hacked into an election system or changed the result of an election or are in a position to commit voter fraud. What the Chinese are doing, as Michael knows but probably can't talk about, with this information, they for years have been gathering personal information on Americans. Remember, they hacked into the federal personnel database years ago. They've hacked into health insurance companies. They're doing
The
that.
2012 campaign.
100%. They're doing that not to change elections in the United States. They're doing that to compile a database so that they can identify American intelligence officers, so that they can target business people for exploitation, so that they can do the things that their intelligence agencies want to do. But as you just said, the intelligence community looked very hard at this, and they saw no evidence in 2020, and nothing Donald Trump said contradicts that China tried or did anything to change the result of an election in any state. What they did was they mounted an influence operation, as did Russia, was trying to get Donald Trump elected, and Iran was disfavoring Trump and favoring Biden. China, this report said, was relatively neutral, may have leaned against Trump in some instances, but they've been doing that for years. They're doing that right now. That's not the same as changing votes or hacking into voting machines.
So, look, family, you can't say it's a crisis when it helps your political narrative and then dismiss it when the evidence shows the other side doing it. That's not journalism, that's propaganda. That's them protecting their preferred outcome, not the truth. And then you have these so-called experts on the news saying, well, voter files are publicly available anyway. You can buy them. You can download them. This is not a big deal. And they're laughing about it on TV, and they're literally laughing. And my response to that is, if voter files are publicly available and it's no big deal, then why did China need to hack them? Why won't the states give over their voter rolls? Why did they need to steal them? China, right? Why did China hack them? Why aren't the states giving over their voter rolls? And why do they need to steal them if they're available so readily and so easily? Why did they need to set up a data exploitation unit? If it's all public information, then China could have just gone to the same website that everybody else uses and downloaded the data legally. But they didn't. They compromised the system. They hacked it. They stole it. And the media is sitting there telling you, don't worry about it. It's public information anyway. That's like saying, oh, somebody broke into your house and stole your TV. But don't worry, you can buy a TV at Best Buy. The point is not that the information exists somewhere. The point is that a foreign adversary illegally obtained it and used it to influence our elections. Stop trying to downplay it and stop trying to gaslight us. And the other thing that really gets me is how they are now accusing the president of declassifying random tips and conspiracy theories like they're trying to muddy the waters. But when it came to the Epstein files, when it came to random allegations against Trump, they had no problem with the government declassifying unverified tips. They ran with it. They put it on the front page. They treated it as gospel. But now that the declassified document supports the president's claims about election integrity, now they want to say, oh, these are just raw tips. These are unverified. You can't trust them. The hypocrisy is staggering. It's almost like the standard changes depending on which side the information hurts. Now, let me tell you what the takeaway is here, because this is what I want you to really understand. The media is not in the business of informing you. They are in the business of protecting the narrative. When they refused to air Trump's speech live, they told you exactly who they work for. They don't work for the American people. They work for the establishment, and they work for the people who benefit from keeping you in the dark. And the reason they didn't want you to hear this speech is because they know that if the American people actually understood how vulnerable our elections are, there would be a demand for a change they couldn't control. So it tells you right there, if you, whether you disagree or not, couldn't, out of respect for the position of the president, you couldn't air the speech of the president addressing the nation. That tells you right there that makes every American person or a lot of people question, okay, he cannot be saying things that are not false because they don't even want to play it. They're not even letting me decide if the information I feel is true as an American citizen because they're taking the opportunity away from me not even to see it. And they know that if you heard about 220 million voter rolls being stolen by China, if you heard about 278,000 non-citizens registered to vote, if you heard about the Intelligence Committee covering it up, you would be demanding answers. You would be demanding the SAVE Act and you would be demanding voter ID. And coincidentally, ironically, the SAVE Act and voter ID is actually bipartisan. They tried to use the excuse that minorities, black and Hispanics, they have barriers and they won't be able to get an ID, which you need an ID to drink, you need an ID to drive a car, you need an ID for a multitude of things. You need an ID to go into federal buildings. Shoot, you need an ID to go to the Obama library that just opened up. Barack Hussein Obama library that opened up in Chicago that displaced citizens and got them out their homes to build that thing. Right? And Democrats blacks and Hispanics who vote more Democrat still actually supports the SAVE Act. Republicans and Democrats. So this is a bipartisan thing, right? But it threatens their power structure because a system where elections are secure and transparent is a system where the people have control. And they don't want you to have control, even though they should be working for the people. This is party over people, not people over party anymore. They want to control you, so they filter what you hear. They decide what's important, and they decide what's a conspiracy theory, quote unquote, and what's a legitimate concern. But here's the thing, family: you don't need them to tell you what to think. You have eyes, you have ears, you have common sense. And when you see a story this big being buried by the same networks that spent years screaming about Russia, you heard what he said. Oh, just like with Russia, with Trump, with the interference, Russia, Russia, Russia. You know something is wrong. And that brings me to the life wisdom part of this because there's always a lesson here. The Bible says in Proverbs chapter 11, verse 1, dishonest scales are an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. I'm going to say it again. Dishonest scales are an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. Now, think about that in the context of what we just talked about. A scale is a tool for measuring value. It's supposed to be fair. It's supposed to be accurate. When you go to the market and you buy a pound of something, you expect that scale to tell the truth, right? It was the whole controversy with customers being upset with Walmart because they weren't getting the actual price proportionate to how much it weighed by pound. But when somebody tampers with the scale and when they put a thumb on it, when they rig it so that you get less than you paid for, that's dishonest. That's an abomination. And the same principle applies to elections. An election is a scale. It's supposed to measure the will of the people and it's supposed to be fair and accurate. But when you have 220 million voter files stolen by a foreign government and when you have 270,000 non-citizens on the rolls, when you have the Intelligence Committee hiding information, when you have the media refusing to air the truth, you have dishonest scales. You have a system that's been tampered with, and the Bible doesn't mince words about that. It says an abomination. It's detestable because God is a God of truth. He is a God of justice. And a system that is built on lies and deception cannot stand. Now, for those of you who aren't spiritual, here's the same lesson in plain terms. Any system that depends on hiding the truth is a system that will eventually fail. You cannot build a stable society on a foundation of lies, and you cannot have a functional democracy when the people making the decisions don't have access to the information they need to make those decisions. The media covering up the story is not just a political move, it's a threat to the entire concept of self-governance. Because if we don't know what's happening, we can't fix it. If we don't know the scale is rigged, we think we're getting a fair deal when we're not. It actually comes off like censorship because they're censoring what you're able to know. And that's why this matters. That's why you need to pay attention. That's why you need to share this information because the truth is the only thing that sets us free. At the end of the day, family, the question is simple. Do you want to live in a country where the elections are honest and the people decide? Or do you want to live in a country where the scales are being rigged and censored and you're just told what to believe? I know my answer. Let me know what you think in the comments. Hit the like button, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on your post notifications. Spread that peace, love, and positivity. Let the love supersede the hate, family. As always, we just having a conversation. Peace.